Buckle up, folks, because in today's episode of America But Make It Theater, we're watching Democrats perform their favorite role, defenders of due process. Just not for you. See, while average Americans deal with crime, inflation, and a border that leaks like Hunter Biden's iCloud, your elected clowns are flying first class to El Salvador to rescue a man tied to MS-13. Yep. Nothing says land of the free like lobbying for a possible gang affiliate while ignoring actual citizens. In the clips ahead, we'll see Representative Yasemin Ansari twist herself into a rhetorical pretzel trying to make treason sound like compassion. Apparently, the left's new patriotism test involves caring more about deported criminals than the people paying for their flights. Let's dig into that delusion.
I am very interested in Democrats caring about due process for illegal aliens. What process do you think is still due an individual who two courts found had reasonable belief to believe he had an affiliation with MS-13, who his wife initially said had scratched her and caused a bruising on her body? What process would make you feel like the Constitution and our framers' understanding of it would be fulfilled?
So, Laura, you and I can disagree on, this individual in particular. I'm not here to really advocate for one person. That needs to happen in court. No evidence has actually ever been presented.
You went to El Salvador. Now you're saying it's not about him? Of course it's about him.
Due process.
You went to El Salvador for a political stunt, and now you're saying it's not about him.
It is about this case. Laura, it is about the rule of law. This is a bipartisan issue. It transcends partisan politics. That's why a conservative-leaning Supreme Court has said that Donald Trump must facilitate the return of this individual. This is very dangerous. We are turning into an authoritarian country, and there are Americans from all across the political spectrum who are deeply concerned about this. Again, my office has not received more calls about any other issue since I have been a congresswoman than this one, tariffs being the second one, and the lack of real logical economic policy, but the issue of due process.
Let's get something straight right off the bat. When a sitting U.S. congresswoman hops on a plane to El Salvador, not to address the border crisis, not to investigate cartel activity, but to advocate for the return of a man accused of gang affiliation and domestic violence, we're not witnessing due process. We're witnessing political performance art wrapped in legal jargon and sold to you as moral clarity. Spoiler alert, it's none of that. Now, first we get Representative Yasemin Ansari saying, there's nothing more American than due process and the rule of law. That's a nice line, but when the subject in question isn't even a U.S. citizen and has been deported due to suspected ties to MS-13, one of the most violent transnational gangs on earth, that phrase doesn't hit quite the same. This is a man whose own wife originally accused him of domestic violence. Courts reviewed his record. He wasn't dragged out in the middle of the night by some rogue agency. He was processed, he was evaluated, then he was removed. And let's not pretend like this wasn't adjudicated. Ansari tries to claim no evidence was ever presented. Really? Two courts found enough credibility in his alleged gang affiliation to deny relief. That's not nothing. That's the justice system doing its job based on facts and testimony before it. But Democrats now treat any deportation as a civil rights emergency, and apparently no ruling is valid unless it fits their activist playbook. Then comes the rhetorical sleight of hand. Notice how when Ingram presses her on the individual case of Abrego Garcia, Ansari says she's not here to advocate for one person, after literally flying to El Salvador to advocate for one person. It's a classic bait and switch. When the facts are inconvenient, pivot to vague platitudes about the rule of law. She says it's not about him after making it entirely about him. That's like showing up at someone's wedding, grabbing the mic, and then saying, this isn't about the bride, but I got a lot to say about this chick. And the delusion goes further when she calls this a bipartisan issue, which is rich. A couple of Democrats and a Supreme Court technicality don't make this bipartisan. It's like saying one person clapping at a terrible movie makes it a standing ovation. Let's be real. This isn't about restoring order. It's about eroding the concept of borders altogether, wrapped in moral preening. And as for the Supreme Court, they didn't say Trump must fly down personally and escort the man back. They said the administration must facilitate the process if the deportation was ruled improper, but the facilitation depends on El Salvador cooperating, which they aren't. Bukele already said he's not going to smuggle this man back into the country because the man was here illegally. So Democrats are demanding that we not only overturn our own immigration processes, but also force a foreign country to return someone they clearly don't want. That's not due process, that's due delusion. And let's further dismantle this myth that the Democrats keep waving around, this 9-0 Supreme Court ruling like it's some divine mandate handed down from Mount Washington. But here's the truth. The court didn't rule on the merits of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case. There was no 9-0 judgment affirming his innocence, his moral purity, or his right to re-enter America. What actually happened was far more procedural and limited. The court declined to intervene in a lower court's emergency order requiring the government to facilitate Garcia's return. Facilitate. Not guarantee, not execute, not override a foreign government's sovereignty. And the justices explicitly instructed the lower court to clarify the scope of its demand so as not to overstep into the executive branch's authority over foreign policy. So while Democrats try to spin this as a unanimous rebuke of Trump, what it really was is a narrow-scoped denial to halt an order, not a ringing endorsement of Garcia's claims or a constitutional referendum on deportation policy. It's not a vindication. It's not even a victory. It's legal limbo dressed up as a moral triumph by the Democrats. Finally, Ansari further insists, saying Americans across the political spectrum are blowing up her phone over this. Really? More calls than about inflation, crime, border security, housing? You're telling me an MS-13, an alleged MS-13 member is causing more Americans to call you about that man than about the problems that they're experiencing day to day in Arizona? I call BS. I truly doubt that the good people of Arizona's 3rd District, where cartel violence and illegal crossings are actual daily threats, are losing any sleep over the deportation of a Maryland father, a Maryland man, back to El Salvador. Sounds less like grassroots outrage and more like activist theater echoing through social media outrage. Now, the real issue here is the left's selective use of rule of law. When it's about masking mandates, lockdowns, censorship, or prosecuting political enemies, the law is sacred. When it's about enforcing immigration policy, suddenly the Constitution is just a rough draft. Do what Eli Mistal wants to do. Throw it out and rewrite it just like the South African one. They want the appearance of virtue without the burden of consistency. So no, Representative Ansari, this isn't about justice. It's about optics. It's about scoring moral points at the expense of American sovereignty. And if this is the hill Ansari and Democrats want to die on, championing the return of a man suspected of gang ties and abuse while your own constituents deal with real issues, you've made it very clear that to Democrats, Americans come last.
Before we go, Congresswoman, also in Maryland, I know American citizens and crimes committed against them might not be a top priority. It is for this show. An illegal alien from Guatemala was just charged with his girlfriend's murder. In Maryland, same state, of course, Mr. Abrego Garcia is from. She was missing for 2 weeks, mother of 2 young kids. Police found her buried in a forest. Do you know about this story? Do your constituents care about those victims? And do you intend on calling that family, since Maryland residents are obviously a concern in some way, shape, or form for you and all the people of your state?
I'm appalled by any violence that takes place in this country. As a former city official, I have a very strong pro-public safety record, and that's why I believe in the rule of law, and that's why this case is so important. I think these questions are a distraction from the main issue, which is that Donald Trump is defying the Supreme Court of the United States, and every American should be concerned about this.
Congresswoman, I know you can't mean that, and I'm not trying to play gotcha here. I know you don't mean that American citizens are distractions.
No,
victims aren't distractions.
You are changing the subject. Today, we are here to talk about the lack of due process for an individual who was illegally deported from this country. That is the subject of this interview. But you have not, any other act of violence.
But Congresswoman, I've given you, just so everyone understands. Yeah, well, the violence committed by illegal immigrants against innocent Americans and legal immigrants has been appalling. appalling.
Now that is what real gaslighting looks like, because in this exchange between Laura Ingraham and Representative Yasemin Ansari, we saw a master class in political deflection dressed up as righteous indignation. The topic was simple: why are elected Democrats flying to El Salvador to advocate for the return of an alleged MS-13 gang member, but can't be bothered to even acknowledge American citizens being murdered by illegal aliens in the same state, in Maryland, where this Maryland father was living until the point he got deported? And instead of answering that directly, Representative Ansari does what Democrats do best: pivot to the rule of law, as if saying it enough times makes it true. Her response: "I'm appalled by any violence," followed by a list of vague job titles and a hard left turn into Trump derangement syndrome. Apparently, the real crime here isn't that a mother of two was butchered and buried in the woods by an illegal alien. It's that Donald Trump didn't roll out the red carpet for a deported Salvadorian national with alleged ties to MS-13. And let's be clear, this is not about due process. This is about Democrats using due process as a political smokescreen to justify prioritizing foreign nationals over their own citizens. And notice how Ansari immediately brands Ingram's question about a murdered American woman as a distraction. That's not just tone deaf, it's quite literally morally bankrupt. Since when is a slaughter of a mother a distraction? Since when is the slaughter of any American a distraction? Only when it gets in the way of a good Democrat virtue signaling campaign. That's when. Now, it goes without saying that she deployed one of the most disgusting red herrings that you'll get a chance to witness on TV. When confronted with uncomfortable facts, Ansari drags the conversation back to her narrative. The talking point about Trump defying the court, also dishonest. Again, the court didn't rule 9-0 on the merits of Garcia's case. They simply refused to intervene in a procedural order, telling the administration to facilitate his return if possible, while also reminding the lower court not to overreach into the executive's foreign policy powers. It's not a ruling. That's a punt. The truth is, Democrats like Ansari treat American tragedies as inconvenient plot holes in their quote-unquote humanitarian narrative. They champion illegal immigrants with shadowy pasts while ignoring U.S. citizens who are raped, stabbed, or shot by criminals who shouldn't be here in the first place. That's not compassion. That's just straight up contempt for the American public, the people they're elected to serve. And the kicker, when asked whether she would even call the family of the murdered Maryland woman, Ansari dodged like a Vegas magician, because to acknowledge that tragedy would be to admit the consequences of her own open border ideology. So no, Congresswoman Ansari, this wasn't a distraction. This was the point. American lives should come first. America should always come first. And if that sounds controversial to you, maybe you're in the wrong country, and you should do us all a favor and self-deport, like Rosie O'Donnell.
Rosie, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, some people entertain the idea of moving abroad after the 2024 election. You actually did it. Tell us about your experience so far, and do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets. Not a day has gone by that I thought it was the wrong decision. I was welcomed with open arms. I knew after reading Project 2025 that if Trump got in, it was time for me and my non-binary child to leave the country. And although I was not one of the celebrities who announced that that's what I would do, I made the decision within my family and my therapist. And should he win, and then when he did, we made the plan into action, and we were gone before he was inaugurated.
You've been a longtime critic of this Trump administration and a target of President Trump, for that matter, as well. What has it been like watching the last few months unfold from abroad? It's been heartbreaking, I have to tell you. I knew that if I was in the United States and watched him destroy the country and the Constitution and really pay no mind to any of the laws that the founders stood by and that our country stands for as a beacon of shining light and freedom for the rest of the world, that should he do what the Heritage Foundation said he was going to do in that Project 2025, that we were going to be in big trouble. And it's as bad as they promised, and even a little bit worse. And it's been heartbreaking and personally very, very sad to watch.
Rosie O'Donnell has officially gone from celebrity meltdown to self-parody. Apparently, she read Project 2025, a public policy wish list from the Heritage Foundation, great organization, by the way, run by some true patriots, and decided It was so terrifying, so apocalyptic, that she grabbed her non-binary child and fled the country like she was escaping a civil war. Rosie says she wasn't one of those celebrities who promised to leave America if Trump won. She just did it quietly, like a freedom fighter, with a therapist on speed dial. How convenient. Now let's break down this Razzie-worthy performance, because every line is a masterclass in elite detachment, emotional manipulation, and just straight up intellectual laziness. Now Rosie paints Project 2025 as a political equivalent of Mein Kampf, despite it being nothing more than a policy blueprint for reining in the administrative state, cutting bureaucracy, restoring executive authority, and promoting constitutional governance. Scary stuff, right? You'd think the Heritage Foundation was running torture camps instead of publishing white papers, but Rosie doesn't engage with a single actual policy point. Instead, she just blurts the name like it's Beetlejuice and expects mass hysteria to follow. Second, let's talk about her claim that Trump destroyed the Constitution and paid no mind to the laws the founder stood by. Bold accusation, Rosie, especially when it's coming from someone who probably thinks Roe v. Wade is in the Constitution and that shouting on social media counts as civic engagement. If she had read the Constitution as closely as she claims to have read Project 2025, she'd know that most of Trump's supposedly authoritarian moves, like border enforcement or challenging executive overreach, are all well within Article 2 power. Meanwhile, the actual constitutional abuses came from lockdown mad governors and unelected bureaucrats censoring speech and shutting down churches. I mean, must I go on? We haven't even started talking about Biden and what his government did to social media companies. But we've got more to get to. Her emotional appeal, where Rosie invokes her non-binary child like a human shield, wrapping political theater in identity politics. It's the classic progressive play, suggesting that policy disagreement equals physical danger to marginalized people. There's no evidence Trump's administration ever targeted non-binary Americans, but if you listen to Rosie, Project 2025 might as well be titled Handmaid's Tale MAGA Edition. It's cheap fear-mongering, and worse, it's condescending. She's assuming the average American is too dumb to know the difference between a government accountability plan and a straight-up dictatorship. And here's a kicker. Rosie claims the U.S. no longer represents freedom and had to be abandoned. She says this from the comfort of Ireland, in between sips of her overpriced coffee while calling it an exile. But here's the irony. Ireland is a nation where free speech is under active assault. Hate speech laws are expanding to criminalize vague, offensive content, and even private messages can be used to prosecute dissent. Ireland has aggressively pursued speech policing, with politicians openly bragging about censoring wrongthink and criminalizing memes. They've clamped down on religious expression, imposed strict lockdowns, and forced digital ID initiatives that would make the average American recoil. If Rosie thinks that's more free, she doesn't understand the meaning of the word. So let's be honest, if America were truly collapsing into fascism, Rosie O'Donnell wouldn't be Skyping into morning shows in America. She'd be smuggled out of the country in a shipping container. Instead, she's doing exactly what she's always done, playing the victim while living like royalty. And here's the brutal reality about this situation. Only rich Democrat elites like Rosie O'Donnell have the luxury of turning political tantrums into international getaways. This is not a single mom in Ohio trying to survive Bidenflation. It's a multi-millionaire with private therapists, media handlers, and the resources to move her family to another country, branding it an exile because she didn't like the results of a free election. And to take this point even further, CNN labels Rosie a comedian and an actress. The truth is, she's neither. It's never been more apparent that people like Rosie are a part of Hollywood agitprop, serving as a full-time propaganda mouthpiece, performing real-world soap opera drama to prop up left-wing ideology. These people don't create art, they manufacture fear, using their platforms to emotionally manipulate the public while living in bubbles so detached from the average American that they think reading a Heritage Foundation policy brief is grounds for political asylum. So no, Rosie, you didn't flee tyranny. You fled relevance. You turned a policy paper into a horror film, cast yourself as the lead, and ran off to avoid reading the script. The real tragedy, you're delusional enough to think that you're brave. But the chickens are coming to roost for the left, because not everybody in Hollywood is happy with him right now. And they're starting to get some pushback, especially some of the folks over at MSNBC.
40% of Americans don't trust mainstream media. Why is that? How did we get here?
Listen, we are seeing a huge loss in trust of all of our institutions. It's the media, it's medicine, it's banking. It's a huge problem because when you think about democracy and all of these pillars, they need to stand tall, they need to stand strong. And sort of losing that trust is not by accident. It's by design. If you remember when President Trump was running the first time, Steve Bannon once said the goal is to blow the whole thing up. And so I think that you've got mistakes made or things starting to slip while at the same time there's a concerted effort to destroy the media. Because the media, the news media is, in my opinion, the last line of defense of holding power accountable, right? And you had a bit of a perfect storm, right? President Trump won, and tons of people were shocked or angry or frustrated, and they're tuning out. And at the same time, you have the Elon Musk media machine because they want you to leave traditional media and they want you to go to X, which is a bastion of misinformation where there is no fact checking. So it's a perfect storm of people saying, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm tuning out, I'm disconnecting. And then you have a force pushing it. But even in the last 2 weeks, what we need to do is just cover what's happening in America, right? We have to cover Democrats trying to figure out what their lane is and how they're going to get back on their feet. And we have to simply cover what this White House is doing. And I think if we do that, right, there's that saying, you know, trust is gained in raindrops and it's lost in buckets. And it's not yes, you're not incorrect that the media has lost trust.
This is where I would push back. When I see this kind of insight and passion being directed at the current administration and the lack of this kind of insight and passion being directed at the previous administration, where, again, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about left-leaning news media organizations were kind of like, la, 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 everything's fine. Look, the environment's look, the economy's great, la, 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 immigration's not that much of a problem. And really being Cleopatra, queen of denial. Thank you. Boom.
Well, that was surely a meltdown, courtesy of MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle, who claims that Americans don't trust the news anymore because Donald Trump and Elon Musk designed it that way. Not because the media lied, censored stories, smeared conservative and moderates and any American with common sense, and colluded with intelligence agencies to bury truth, but because Trump and Musk apparently are media supervillains with hypnotic powers over 40% of the country. This is a classic case of projection. The press spent years gaslighting the American public, denying inflation was real, claiming the border was secure while footage showed cartel chaos, insisting men could get pregnant, treating the Hunter Biden laptop as Kremlin disinfo, and pushing that Joe Biden's cognitive abilities were perfectly fine. Now that so many Americans have walked away, they're blaming their collapse in credibility on outside forces. It's like lighting your own house on fire, then blaming the neighbors for calling 911. Ruhle's entire argument rests on a false cause fallacy that because trust in media declined during the Trump years, Trump must have caused it. But trust didn't plummet because of Trump's rhetoric. It plummeted because the media validated his criticism by behaving exactly as he described. From Russiagate hoaxes to COVID lab leak denials to outright censorship of dissenting views on social media, legacy outlets became what they swore they were fighting: partisan tools protecting power, not challenging it. And ironically enough, that's where Rainn Wilson, yes, Dwight Schrute from The Office, comes in with more clarity than the so-called journalists. Wilson hits the mark when he points out that left-leaning media covered for the Biden administration with Sesame Street level naivete. He says, la, 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 everything's fine. It's not just funny, it's incredibly accurate. We went from wall-to-wall coverage over Trump tweets to barely a murmur as Biden mangled speeches, ignored border chaos, and presided over the worst inflation in 4 decades. The press didn't hold power accountable. They gave it a press pass and a warm blanket. And then there's Ruhle's dig at Elon Musk for daring to buy a social media platform and make it open to opinions outside the CNN Atlantic cocktail circuit. Ruhle calls X a bastion of misinformation, which is rich coming from an industry that told you cloth masks were effective, inflation was transitory, and that men can breastfeed. The truth is platforms like X are a threat, not because people lie, but because X can't compete. X breaks the monopoly on information the mainstream media had up until a few years ago. And when you've been the unchallenged gatekeepers of truth for decades, competition feels a little like sabotage. And Ruhle also uses a ton of loaded language. She says, perfect storm, destroy the media, we're the last line of defense. These aren't arguments, these are appeals to fear. The media wants to paint itself as the only thing standing between America and authoritarian collapse, while conveniently ignoring how they cheerled for actual authoritarianism when it suited them, like censoring the lab leak theories, doxing private citizens, and pushing for speech policing under the guise of disinformation. And the real kicker, Ruhle says that the media just has to cover what's happening in America. That's pretty nice. Would be great if you actually did that, but they don't. They cover narratives. They cover optics. They cover whatever serves the regime. And when that doesn't work, they smear anyone who's better at it, whether it's Tucker, Musk, or your uncle with a Substack. I think it goes without saying that all this is beyond laughable. It's insulting to hear Stephanie Ruhle clutch her pearls over Trump and Steve Bannon supposedly wanting to blow everything up when it's her side that's been lighting the fuse under this country for years. The left has openly fought to dissolve America from within, using every cultural, academic, corporate, and bureaucratic institution to undermine our founding principles. Just a couple of weeks ago, AOC hinted again that America should collapse so it can be replaced with something better. Her usual not-so-subtle nod to a Marxist-style revolution dressed up as equity. Meanwhile, Trump and Bannon aren't calling for the actual destruction of America. They're calling to destroy the bloated, unaccountable administrative state that's grown into a fourth, unelected branch of government. They want to drain the swamp, not set fire to the village. The real demolition crew is the modern Democrat Party, which is obsessed with expanding government power, controlling language, and eroding national identity through evolved cultural Marxist psyops that pit citizens against citizens until the country implodes from within. If anyone's aiming to blow up the system, it's the people handing out kindling while accusing others of arson. So no, trust in media didn't collapse because of Trump. It collapsed because the media earned it. They spent years crying wolf, and now the villagers have turned them out. The only perfect storm was one of their own making. So ask yourself, who's really tearing this country apart? Is it the people demanding accountability from a bloated, unaccountable government, or the ones calling for its complete transformation, erasure of its history, and replacement with some utopian fantasy cooked up in a grad school seminar? The loudest voices preaching democracy dies in darkness are often the ones flipping the light switch when it exposes too much truth. And the same elites who claim they're defending institutions are the ones hollowing them out from the inside, using your trust as fuel for their agenda. If the media, the government, and the cultural class all speak in unison, shouldn't that make you pause? Maybe the real act of rebellion isn't believing what they tell you. It's daring to question it. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.